Peace. I'm gonna be talking about this book that I got from the library last Friday, and I seen some videos off Wacky World of O. He talked about economics, what we're gonna do about it. Well, the economics back then, it's just like it sounds like this book right here, and it talks about the progressive era, 1900s to 1920s, and this is a time before World War One and probably after World War One. So this book is very interesting, and I'm gonna get a page out of this book. It's called Black Georgia. We known as so-called black people. That's what they called us, black, back then. But it's by John Dittmer. John Dittmer was the one that at first I didn't want to pick up this book, and this book was very interesting. I'm still reading it though, and it talks about a lot of racial politics, and it talks about community, new slavery. I think I got it written down somewhere, but I'll get that in a minute. Let's see here. On page 3, if you get this book, I think you can order it online or something, but I got this from the library. It's an old book. I think I got the original copy. It's an old book by John Dittmer. I'll read a part when it says about W.E. Du Bois, even though he was a Mason, but W.E.B. Du Bois once observed that Georgia was not only the geographical focus of America's black population, but in many other respects, but now and yesterday, the Negro problems have, so-called Negroes or so-called blacks, whatever you want to call it, seemed to be the center in the state. Georgia was in the heart of the Cotton Kingdom with slavery. Its dominant institutions before the Civil War, that conflict left much of the state in ruins, but white supremacy, known as Roman supremacy, but however was not to be casualty, outliving both slavery and the war to become the only just basis for dealing with freed men. The brief post-war reconstruction did not satisfy Georgia's 500,000 newly freed slaves. The peculiar institutions died hard there, and the federal government's failure to provide economic compensation for years of forced labor often put blacks at the mercy of former masters after meeting all congressional requirements, including Negro enfranchisement. The Masons back then. That's where what's his name? Du Bois was part of the Boule, and he kind of destroyed what's his name, Marcus Garvey. It talks about him a little bit in this book, and it's sad, but these people back then, like Heman Perry, he was revolutionary. I read some of him in here, and it said how he flourished, and then he kind of failed and went for the integrationist mode. I mean, it's a trip. Talks about Henry McNeil Turner, things like that, and then it says in Franchise Georgia rejoined the Union in July 1868, but 2 months later, Georgia's House of Representatives evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. That's when that BS starts. It's all perpetuated by these devils, expelled 25 black members. That's what they said. Shortly after, the predominantly Republican Senate removed 2 black members, including Henry McNeil Turner, in protest and dismissal of young Turner, warned that the white men are not to be trusted. They will betray you. This means revolution. So yeah, they was fighting the clans back then, but I'm gonna stop right there. As a map, I know you can see in this book, it's like before you turn after page 4, in the mountains they was ruling. These are the 5 sections of Georgia. I couldn't put it on the screen, but I couldn't find it. It said the 5 sections of Georgia with percentage blacks form of a total population in 1910. They took Wiregrass, Black Belt, in Macon, Albany, Augusta, Columbus. They tried to took Atlanta at one time, but the whites kind of pushed them out and told them go back to where you came from and told them back. You remember those days, like in the neighborhood, and you try to sell business. What they did, they said go back home and leave your stuff here, and they kind of like stealing your stuff in a sense. That's what they did back then. That's what they do. That's what these devils do in the mountains. But that's just part of the summary of it. But I've done the working parts of this, the working. I'm gonna get it right here. Yeah, I mentioned the 5 sections. Okay. It says working after the Civil War, most black people followed the same line of work they have engaged in during slavery. Antebellum houses servants became caterers, barbers. Um, write this down. Barbers. What's that? Okay. Okay, barbers, maids, and cooks, while slave carpenters, blacksmiths, brick masons sold their own service after freedom. But they did have 70,000 tenants, and blacks did had 70,000 tenants, and they also had 10,000 farmers at this time period. You know, it was a progressive era. We was trying to build our own economics after slavery, kind of like Booker T. Washington. And he told them take the same ideas if you want to go to another country or a new land after you was free. He was trying to form a two-state solution, kind of like what Malcolm did. But Malcolm took it to the extreme. He took it to where Garvey wanted, but what he was trying to do, Malcolm was trying to elevate to the highest level. But Malcolm wasn't like that, you know, at first. But now he realized, but most black people didn't want it. He realized that black people he was disgusted from them. And the man was disgusted, and I think Brother Dawood explained that very well in some of the videos I've seen. And it's right, you know, he was disgusted. If you did your history, I mean, Malcolm, he was pissed. Nobody didn't show up to his last lecture, and he was murdered by his own people, and his own people worked for the CIA, and that was Elijah Muhammad's son and Farrakhan. You know, they didn't care nothing about Malcolm. Malcolm wanted something that of his own. These people here that's in religion, they don't want none of this stuff. They want us dead, and it tells you a lot. And here, you know, they said the black pastor is a cancer. He's a curse. They said, no, he's a curse through the black community, they would say, so-called black community. Okay, I'm going to get on to community. Let's get right to the community. To be black in Georgia was to fall victim to white oppression, to live each day in the shadow of violence. White supremacy prevailed, but it did not destroy the spirit of the black community, they say. Blacks built their own institutions behind the walls of segregation and preaching race pride, practicing self-help, just as lynchings, white capings, and race riots were facts of life in black Georgia. So where church picnics, baseball games, and Saturday night frolics, the history of the black community defines easily generalization. It is the complex story of men and women struggling to build their own society within a hostile environment. Yep. Ku Klux Klan equals, they represent the white Roman government. But you know, the Roman government, I mean, they're the same, you know, nation. They descendants of Rome, by the way. Racial politics, I didn't write much. It says for Georgia Republicans, the normal routine involving lobbying and for federal patronage and scrambling for the delegate seats to the national convention, but the state party had not filled a full slate of a candidate since 1882. Its leaders appeared content to the fight among themselves, but most whites view the Georgia Republican Party with the contempt labeling it a Negro party led by corrupt whites and a few black spoil seekers. Yep, that was what they labeled it as. You had a lot of that, and I don't know why they labeled it that way, but that's racial politics. But you know, you had a lot of corruption down there, but you know, the economics was good. We was trying to progress as a nation, and it was cut short. No wonder why it said 1900s to 1920. You know what happened? That was a revolutionary time period. And now it's like, you know, when Malcolm brought it back in the 50s and the 60s, he was trying to bring that back again. But what happened? We got destroyed through integration. You know, I saw some videos from Hollow Point Redux. He said something about that integration killed us. I seen the one he said the white people are evil. I mean, so-called white people are evil. He said that, and I kind of enjoyed it too. And he made some sense, and they are, you know, and they still are. You know, we know they're gonna say proverbs, like words, like most people call them racial slurs, but I call them proverbs. They call it everything in the book. You know, I mentioned that in one of my old videos. You can check out on Daily Motion. It's real sad, but you know they still call us they every day. But that's okay. You know, those words don't bother me. It just makes me struggle because he ain't got nothing better else to say. He's upset and emotional. That's how these devils are. Let's go to new slavery. It says now they have built prisons all new to the U.S. Same slavery system. Pig Purdue, talking about Sonny Perdue at the time that this person wrote inside this book, and it's interesting. He said it probably owns 5 jails or more outside info. And that's talking about the new slavery they say in this book. I done did racial politics, so I'm on community. I don't get the. Yeah, I got this on 74 and 75. It was written in this book. Someone wrote it and you know some truth. You know, there's some deep stuff. I'm gonna go to the beginning of it and get you what you're talking about. In the summer of 1902, Sheriff Thomas J. McKillen of Waycross, a small southeast Georgia town, arrests a young black woman named Lula Frazier on an adultery charge. At the sheriff's suggestion, Miss Frazier retained a young white attorney, William F. Crawley. Crawley was no help, but the city solicitor refused to prosecute the defendant because she was legally married to Nathan Frazier. The man named in charge, and instead of letting her go, the sheriff kept Miss Frazier in jail without charge, with her attorney wired a wealthy Valdosta farmer, Edward J. McCree, to come to Waycross for a woman. As McCree's brother was boarding a train for Waycross, Crawley and Sheriff McKellen were informed their prisoner she has been found guilty and faced either a $50 fine or a year on the county chain gang. And penniless and fearing imprisonment. Lula Frazier agreed to work for Edward McCree for 18 months if he paid her fine upon arriving. Slavery, man, you see that? And you know, the new slavery. That's when they start building the prison, but 18 months if he paid her fine, you know, blah, blah, blah. Okay, McCree brother wrote Crawley's a $50 check, which he cashed and presumably divided with Sheriff McKellen at the McCree plantation. Miss Frazier was beaten. She was beaten, locked up at night, and sexually assaulted, raped her. After she had worked there 9 months, her husband and new sheriff obtained her release. 2 black youths, Henry Rimmage and David Smith, were convicted and sentenced to a month on the War County chain gang for stealing a watermelon in August 1903. Frivolous stuff. This is when they. And then this person that wrote this book, the little stuff that goes on today in this state. You got a lot of coons out there, in Georgia, out here, really. I live out here, and they crazy out here. And they'll know nothing about this book, and I mean, they need to read it and what these devils did to them. It's real sad, but, I'm going to end it right there. Hope you got a little insight what I put out there. And this is just more to come, I got this one right here. Yeah. I'm going to be reading some books this week, but this is what I just want to throw up, just a little history about this state. And make sure y'all read it, man. You can catch it online. It's called Black Georgia in the Progressive Era of 1900 to 1920.